Summer routines live or die by how easy they are, and honestly, if something takes too much effort, I'm out. That's why Groons is my go-to. It's my one daily pack of gummies covering my greens, vitamins, and minerals. Plus, it has 6 grams of prebiotic fiber, which is more than 2 cups of broccoli. No mixing powders, no giant pills, no hassle. I just rip open the pack and I'm done. They taste good and they make it easy to stay on top of my health, even when life gets busy. Save up to 52% with the code PODCAST at Groons.co. That's code PODCAST at GRUNS.co.
The Dialed In Angling Podcast, presented by OnX Fish, Arneson's Rocky Point Resort, Strike Master, and 13 Fishing. Well, welcome back to this week's edition of Dialed In Angling, the podcast. Man, I tell you what, we went from winter to summer, just skipped straight over spring. You know, it's just, it happens in Minnesota. You know, it seems like more and more frequently now. It seems like, you know, you go right from cold to warm as soon as you get towards the end of May. Boom, we're into June and summer hits. And that's the case this week. I can't believe these temps. I'm not complaining about it. I love summer, but man, I don't know if I was quite prepared for it. And I don't know if the fish were as well. You know, I fished a lot of different bodies of water. I want to talk about it on this podcast this week. I fished different species this week as well, fishing walleyes, smallmouth bass. I want to cover some panfish. And I just want to talk about the rapid change in not only the bite, but the locations. Crappies, for example, how they went from, you know, pre-spawn, a lot of lakes, they were still out in deeper cabbage. Some of them were just, you know, sort of in that basin adjacent to the areas where they're getting ready to spawn. Then instantly, boom, they're up in the pinweeds. They're up in the shallows spawning. I saw crappies on beds. I saw bluegills in big numbers up shallow this week on a lot of lakes. And man, it's crazy to think that, you know, just a little over a week ago at this time, it was cold. We were talking about the warm up for the weekend, the Memorial Day holiday. But last Thursday, Friday, it was still cold. Surface temps were still cold. You had a lot of pre-spawn panfish. You had pre-spawn smallmouth. And of course, you had walleyes. I had walleyes last week on Leech Lake that were still milking. And so that just puts it in perspective how quickly things are changing and developing into more summer-like patterns, or at least late spring patterns. You know, a lot of times when I think of, you know, the Memorial Day holiday weekend fishing, you know, I think of post-spawn panfish, walleyes that are moving out to summering locations like on Mille Lacs, for example. You get a lot of fish that shift from the sand and these shallow water rock piles into the secondary break lines. You get a lot of movement out to the mud flats with walleyes. Memorial Day weekend, you got tons. You think of lots of smallmouth opportunities where fish are on beds and things of that nature. That happened all within this week. It literally transitioned this week. So let's jump into it. I want to start a little bit about talking about Mille Lacs. I'm going to touch on Leech. I want to give some fishing reports from Winnie and a couple other locations. And then I want to get right into a little bit of smallmouth talk and then pan fishing, because I love pan fishing, especially as you get towards spawn or post-spawn anyway, because I love pitching plastics and I like fishing fast. I like fishing jerkbaits and all sorts of different tactics that you don't get to do when it's cool. You know, I've done a ton of crappie fishing this week, this spring, and a lot of which has been float fishing. And I don't mind float fishing. There's something about springtime watching a bobber go down. Love it. You know, whether it's walleye fishing or pan fishing, you know, but float fishing for panfish is a lot slower. It's harder to find their locations. I like fishing aggressively for a lot of different species, but for panfish in general. And being able to do that now that the water's starting to heat up has been really fun. So let's dive into some Mille Lacs talk. I know a lot of anglers that have been out on Mille Lacs. Angling hours on the lake seem to be up. It seems to be a lot more people going to Mille Lacs Lake. I'm getting a lot more questions, guide trips, references, people that want to head out to Mille Lacs Lake. And that's good to see. And it's been fun out there. You know, this spring has been a little up and down depending on who you talk to. You know, I know a lot of anglers that I talk to sort of struggled around the opener. That week after opener, that little bit of warm up, people started doing better, but then It cooled down again, basically last week before the Memorial Day holiday, and a lot of people struggled again. And for me, it's been pretty consistent. I would say I had a few inconsistent days, a couple cold front days, especially kind of right after opener, sort of struggled a little bit. And there's been areas of the lake where it seems like the fish are biting better than others. And then you go back a week later and it seems like those fish that weren't biting are now. And so on and so forth. So let's talk about how these fish are moving. They're transitioning. A lot of these fish are moving because of good reason, and it's food. Major bug hatches going on in Mille Lacs Lake. If you've driven around the lake this week, especially the last day and a half, the bugs are everywhere. There's all sorts of different insect hatches going on in Mille Lacs. And anytime you get those big bug hatches, you get big time movements of fish moving from the shallows out into deeper water, into those transition areas, and even, some deeper structure where those bugs are hatching. And now sometimes the bugs, it's not that just feeding on the bugs, it just moves that bait fish. And of course, this rapid surface temperature warm up, this rapid water temperature warm up pushes a lot of bait fish. A lot of those spot tail shiners came in quickly, spawned, and then slid back out. There's other cold water species like tulipies. Earlier this year, I was seeing tons and tons of Ciscoes in the shallows. Big groups of Ciscoes in that 12 to 14 foot range. Right now in Mille Lacs, we have an abundance of tulipies in the lake, and they're all, I would say, in that 8 to 12 inch range. Not all, but the vast majority of them are in that 8 to 12 inch range. So you could see these schools of Ciscoes up shallow. As soon as it gets warm like this, you're going to see those Ciscoes push out. They're going to be feeding on the bugs. The shiners are going to be out there feeding on the bugs. Those perch that the walleyes have been keying in on, a lot of those are 3 to 6 inches right now. Those are also feeding on the bugs. So you get this big push of bait fish out to where this bug activity is at. And then, of course, the walleyes follow. It's like clockwork. Every single year, it seems like right around Memorial Day weekend, we go right from, these shallow water fish, these sandfish that are up shallow, feeding on shiners, that sort of thing. And then all of a sudden, boom, you get this sharp transition to fish that are out on the secondary breaks. They're out on the mud flats. They're out on the gravel bars. I know a lot of anglers on Memorial Day weekend, like I cut across the lake a lot when I'm bass fishing or walleye fishing. I like fishing all over the lake. A lot, if it's not rough, I don't care where I launched. Wherever I think the best fishing is where I'm going. And so I rip around the middle of the lake a lot. And from opener into Memorial Day, it's a ghost town, right? You don't see anybody out on the gravel. You don't see anybody out of the mud. There are some fish out there because I fished out there early many times where there's just some scattered fish. There's a lot of times some post-spawn females. I'm sure there's some spawning activity that occurs on Mille Lacs deeper than we think. But as you get into Memorial Day weekend, all of a sudden, you start seeing the boats move out to secondary breaks, the mud flats, the gravel bars. And as I'm ripping across the lake, it's a strong indicator that these fish are moving out there. Even when I have guide trips, it seems like if I'm in shallow and I get that first like dead flat calm day, I start exploring some of the mud flats, some of the gravel bars. I start pushing a little bit deeper. Even now with forward facing sonar, you can really key in on some of these transitions. You don't have to go to just one set structure. You can kind of roam where these fish are at. If you hit an intense bug hatch or you're seeing on your graph where there's lots of bait, lots of activity, slow down and pitch those fish. So let's get into some of my go-to presentations during these bug hatches. I would say now more than ever, especially with forward-facing sonar, it's hard to beat a bobber. Especially if you have kids, if you got a family, if you're going out with a couple buddies, it's hard to beat the bobbers. So the bobbers are working well, bobbers and leeches. Everybody wants those great big giant jumbo leeches. I would say for bobber fishing, my preference really is like a large leech. It doesn't have to be a jumbo. Sometimes I'll mix some jumbos in with larges, but you don't have to have, a pound of jumbos every time you go to Mille Lacs. Now, if I'm drop shotting or rigging, like live bait rigging, then I tend to prefer, a really large leech. Or sometimes if it's dead flat calm, I will go with a monster leech and just kind of let it swim in the water column. But most of the time, I will select, I would say, a little larger than a medium, but like just a large leech. And, putting that on a bobber rod. This year, just like last year, my bobber setup is as follows: bobber, slip knot, bobber, sniper swivel, sinker, light sinker, and then a small 16th ounce jig. That's sort of my go-to. I mix it up a little bit. Sometimes I go with a plain hook. Sometimes I ditch the sinker and I use a little bit heavier sniper swivel. But that sniper swivel has been a real game changer for me when it comes to bobber fishing. Check them out. They're VMC sniper swivels. If you haven't seen them, you can find them on store shelves. I've talked about it on this podcast before, but those sniper swivels are really going to help you get down there quicker, okay? For a long time, anglers would use a swivel with a egg sinker above that, and then their bobber setup, and then a light jig or a plain hook. The problem that I have with the egg sinker is it slides up and down the line, okay? And sometimes that can screw up your cast, but more so than that, it wears on that line, and that lead just wears up and down, and it slams on that swivel all the time. And a lot of times it wears down your knot or wears down your mono above that swivel, causing you to break off. And so it's so nice having that sniper swivel. And what it is just it's weight built into the middle of a swivel. So it's all right there. You don't need the sinker, the egg sinker, the swivel, the whole setup. You literally just have the sniper swivel on there, and then your line, your jig, and you're good to go. Now, here's a quick tip for you for your bobbers. One thing that I do that I think sets me apart from other anglers a lot of times when the bite gets tough, I use a little bit longer leader. And so I have slip knot, bobber, sometimes a bead above my sniper swivel, just so it's never binding on that swivel, depending on the bobber I'm using. The sniper swivel, and then about a 4 foot, sometimes 5 foot lead. I know it's a little bit more challenging to cast, but if they're getting finicky and you're dumping on fish that are either spooking or just, sort of coming up to your baits and not feeding on it, obviously, or not taking the cork down, go to a little bit longer leader. The other thing that you can do that I've noticed a lot now, because I think these fish are getting conditioned to forward-facing sonar, they're getting conditioned to baits dropping right in their face. Cast your bobber out past the group of fish, like if you spot them on forward-facing sonar or even side imaging. We used to just power bobber fish sometimes with 2D sonar. Pitch it out past those fish and then bring your presentation slowly to them, or let it drift to them. Or, if I'm spot locked and let's say that the school of fish is, behind me 40 feet, I'll drop 30 feet and let the slip knot come down to the bobber and let it float naturally through those fish. You're going to get way more bites than dumping it right on their heads, especially with these fish that have been targeted in the past. It seems like, I know there's varying opinions among anglers, like, obviously Rem Moran, he's a constant contributor to this podcast and to the Dial It Angling show. He's a good friend of mine. He doesn't think forward-facing sonar spooks the fish as much as people think. He thinks boats are spooking fish and that sort of thing. I differ in the sense where I feel like it does. Yes, there's times where I get too close to them with my boat, and that's spooking them as well. So I think a lot of times it's a combo of that. But I've had it happen so many times on Mille Lacs with walleyes, with smallmouth. I've had it happen pan fishing with crappies, where you hit them with that signal and boom, they scoot off to the side. And so when you're doing that, a lot of times too is when you hit them with the forward-facing sonar, you cast out to them, try to get that signal off those fish, and just watch your float, let it float naturally. And you're going to pick up more fish that way. For me, I a lot of times during these bug hatches, I like targeting these suspended roaming schools of fish. They might not necessarily be on the structure. Like I was talking about earlier, they're on these transitions. So sometimes these transitions are immediately right after the structure dumps, like where it goes right at the base of the contour line, or where the contour lines start to flatten out. A lot of times that's where you'll see the most bug activity. Or you get these hard transitions where it goes from boulder to mud in a little bit deeper water. But that doesn't mean the fish are down near the bottom. Most of the time during these bug hatches, they're up high. And so setting your depth properly to make sure that you're targeting them at their depth is key. Now, if you have forward-facing sonar, set your depth with your forward-facing sonar. Don't just put a lead weight on there and say, or do the measuring with your arms saying, oh, okay, I'm going to set it at 12 feet with my arms. No. If I see them at 12 foot down on my forward facing sonar, I'm going to set my depth with my forward facing sonar unit to make sure that I'm just above those fish. So about a foot above those fish, I'm going to set up my slip knot. So I make sure that presentation, when I hit them, it's going to be properly. And you're not going to be too deep. You're not going to be too shallow. Mille Lacs is very clear. As we know, you can get away with a foot and a half, sometimes 2 feet, and dump on these pods of fish. And you can adjust it accordingly. If I'm really power fishing and let's say I throw on a school that's at 12 feet, I catch one, I go to the next school and they're at 14 feet, I can quickly, boom, just dump 1 foot on my line and then pitch out there and catch those fish. Another great strategy is, lots of anglers talking about it, and that's just using a jig crawler or just a jig and a leech and just throwing it out there. A lot of times the jig and the leech, I use a really light jig, like a 16th ounce, an 1/8 ounce jig. You can let it just float in the water really slowly. I've even done it with the sniper swivels and a leech, and just putting a leech on there, casting it out there, and then floating that swivel over the top of those fish and just letting that leech swim. Just basically like you'd be live bait rigging, only you're watching it happen or unfold. Another thing I do is a jig crawler. And that is, I like using the Ned heads. The VMC Ned heads work great. You can use a light jig. Most of the time I'm using like an 1/8 ounce jig, just as I like to let it float, half a night crawler, pitching it out there and just floating that over the top of them. Again, not dumping that right in their face, casting past them and then working that, just above the fish. Half a night crawler works great during bug hatches. It truly, I think, I don't know, I'm not a walleye, but it truly looks sort of like that invertebrate, that insect creature. And so that half a night crawler works excellent. So I would try bobber fishing this weekend. It seems like they're going away from the jigs, although I did catch some fish on jigs and plastics this week. One of my favorite bites all year long. I love the brand new Crush City jerk. If you haven't seen it, go to the Rapala website and just look up the Crush City jerk. As soon as this water temperature warms up, I go away from the paddle tails and ripping the paddle tails, and I go right to that Crush City jerk. You can do a mooch minnow too, talking about floating half a night crawler. I've caught them floating mooch minnows. What I love about my job as a guide is I love putting my customers on fish, but then I get to experiment in the back of the boat. As soon as they start catching fish, I start targeting fish in other schools, and I get to experiment. And so using these different plastics, I'm loving these Crush City plastics, the buoyancy of these baits, the fact that they last for a really long time. You can catch a ton of fish on them, but then they just simply work. The colors that are my favorite right now in the Crush City jerks on Mille Lacs Lake would be the electric shad, the gizzard shad, and the smelt. Those are like my absolute go-tos for this water clarity. Now it changes as things start to heat up. We start to get more algae blooms in the lake. I might go to a perch color or even a brighter white color, an albino shad, something like that. But right now, those are sort of my go-tos as we approach this area where the water's warming up, but we don't have a ton of algae yet. Sort of my go-to, how I've been targeting fish on Mille Lacs, targeting walleyes anyway. That's how I've been going about it. So hopefully that helps you when you're going to Mille Lacs Lake. One thing I do want to talk about is the bedfish on Mille Lacs, smallie fishing. The fish really dramatically went from pre-spawn, and a lot of these fish were deep even, to spawn. I mean, they're up on their beds, they're spawning. There was males up there, females, they were just like doing their thing. Not a huge bed fisherman. I just want to say that. I'm not ripping on anybody that is. I just want to say, I'm absolutely against, these people bed fishing and then they're putting them in their live well and fishing a tournament and dragging these fish all over the lake or to a weigh-in. I hate seeing that. And so, if you are bed fishing, you should really just take the fish off, get it back in as quick as possible, and then move on, instead of, weighing these fish. I know a lot of anglers that will put, their 5 best smallmouth in their live well, run them all over the lake, and then release them somewhere else. I don't get that. I'm not ripping on anybody right now, but I'm just saying that if we want really good smallmouth fishing for years to come, we have to be respectful of the resource. And if you are bed fishing out there, just make sure you're getting these fish back in as quickly as possible. This bed season is going to go by quickly with these water temps warming up and these fish bedding up, really rapidly. We'll get through this. It's not my favorite time of year. I try not to book that many smallmouth trips really this time of year. I just don't. I like post-spawn. As we get towards post-spawn, it gets absolutely electric again. Those fish are feeding. They put the feed bags on. You can do a lot of different things to catch those fish. And so that's my 2 cents on it. But yes, if you are heading to Mille Lacs and you want a good, multi-species trip, you caught a bunch of walleyes in the morning, or you got your limit, or whatever you're trying to do out there for walleye fishing, and you want to go catch some smallmouth, plenty of fish on beds, plenty of fish up shallow for you to see. It truly is an absolute world-class fishery. So, hey, we're going to take a quick break. When I come back, I want to get into fishing Leech Lake. I want to talk about some of the areas you can target on Leech Lake. I was up on Leech this week. Same thing, man. You can see it on your graph. There are fish moving. There are fish changing. We've got some bug hatches coming on Leech. After that, I want to talk some pan fishing. Stay tuned. We got more dialed in angling after this.
Arneson's Rocky Point Resort in northern Minnesota offers a little something for everyone. Nestled on Lake of the Woods South Shore, it provides easy access to 14 remarkable reefs. Serious anglers know that Arneson's offers some of the best fishing, charter fishing, and small boat fishing options, all supported by the largest protected marina on the lake's south shore. Accommodation selections range from 1 to 5 bedrooms. Equipped with all the modern conveniences, guests can enjoy a delightful dining experience and stunning lake views at the Rock Harbor Lodge, an on-site full-service bar and restaurant. The 2 beaches provide hours of fun for the whole family. Whether you're seeking an idyllic fishing spot or a relaxing vacation, Arneson's Rocky Point has everything you need. Check them out at arnesonsresort.com.
All right, let's jump right into some Leech Lake discussion. Much like Mille Lacs Lake, Leech has the same thing. A lot of these fish that are transitioning from the really shallows, a lot of that bait and activity that was up, extremely shallow, quickly moved out into some, I would say, secondary breaks. I wouldn't classify Leech like Mille Lacs, where you have these giant migrations of fish immediately from shoreline out to structure. But you do see a big shift in fish. And so a lot of these fish that I was catching up on Leech, a week ago when it was cold, I was dragging shiners, finding fish up in that shallow sand. They've now moved out a little bit. So instead of being up in that 6-8 feet, I'm seeing a lot of fish in that 10, 11, 12 foot, even some deeper rocks. I'm finding fish. Today we were screwing around. We had the Lund photo shoot. We were up there for that. Screwing around in the boat. I wasn't even fishing, but you could see fish on your graph kind of in the secondary areas. Those fish are starting to slide into their summer locations. And not to say like Leech is like Mille Lacs in the sense where, they're not hitting the jig and shiner. You can still catch plenty of fish on jigs and shiners. You just have to do it in different areas. So, this week on Leech, instead of fishing that sand and that really shallow with jigs and shiners, it seems like the rocks were much better. Getting out to some of those rock piles, some of those deeper rock areas, and then also in the weeds. A lot of these emerging vegetation. Leech, like a lot of other lakes, the vegetation really didn't die off much this winter. A lot of standing milfoil, cabbage, kind of mix up in the shallows, that sandgrass, all of that stuff really stayed alive. And so now you're seeing this emergent vegetation. You're seeing fish slide into those areas because it holds bait fish. You got everything in the weeds. And so if you get up into the weeds, if you get in the rocks, you can still kind of capitalize on that jig and shiner bite. Even some of the deeper sand, I noticed they were hitting the shiners, but it's coming. You're starting to see a little bit of bug hatch. I wouldn't say like a widespread, like big time bug hatch yet on Leech, but you could see it was coming. I could see some stuff on the water. I saw by a couple boathouses when I came in, just the glimpse of some of these bugs that are starting to hatch in Leech. And so very quickly, you're going to see some major bug hatches on Leech. What's cool about Leech, though, it seems like bug hatches occur at different times. Like you'll have a big main lake bug hatch, but they won't be hatching in Walker. And so you can get away from some of those bug hatches and still catch fish in areas where they haven't been impacted by a bug hatch, if that makes sense, especially as we get towards the 4th of July, when you get the big hexagenia hatch on Leech. After that becomes extremely tough fishing. Same can be said for Mille Lacs Lake. It always seems like just before the 4th of July, we get that giant mayfly hatch, that big hexagenia hatch, and that's the big mayflies. People say mayflies, don't they hatch in May? No, they don't. Not on Mille Lacs, not on Leech. Those big mayflies, they tend to hatch later in June, first part of July, a lot of times. And those big buggers are usually the bite killer, where it takes a little while, let's say a week or so, for the fish to adjust, or they're so full off the bugs, they're just not feeding. And so a lot of times when we get those big bug hatches, that's when you hear a lot of people that get the complaints, especially the mayflies. The other smaller hatches, it seems like it drives bait. And yes, I do believe smaller walleyes feed on them, and even bigger walleyes for that matter. They probably feed on some of those bugs a little bit. But a lot of times I think they're feeding on the bait that's feeding on the bugs. The other thing that you have on Leech Lake is rusty crayfish. I think the vast majority of their diet, especially in the rocks, but in the sand too, you see that these rusties are absolutely everywhere on Leech. They're keying in on rusties because my live well will be absolutely full of rusty crayfish at the end of the day. Dead, regurgitated rusty crayfish. And I'm always cleaning them out of there and dumping them. And, they're feeding on that. So Leech Lake tend to dump baits to the bottom a lot, like talking about swimming a jig crawler. Leech Lake, a lot of times I'll swim the jig crawler and then just dump it to the bottom and just let it sit there. You can twitch it a little bit, but a lot of times they just pick that up off the bottom. And I think for years and years and years, the reason that, that jig and shiner bite has always been just killer into the summer a little bit longer is this, ramp up of rusty crayfish over the last 10 years, right? They're feeding on the bottom, so that shiner minnows on the bottom. It just seems like that shiner bite lasts a lot longer. So, again, if you're heading to Leech Lake, rock piles, the reefs, everything fishes different on Leech, whether it's, the southeast side of the lake, you're going to see fish move to those humps that weren't there last week. If you're in the center of the lake, whether it's pelican, it could be annex, submarine, any of those areas, mookie, any rocks there. Stony Point is another good area. Ottertail Point, Ivans, all of these areas you can think of. Battle Point, Bear Island, all of these quality rock areas that you can think of. You could go scan and start catching fish in those areas. They're really moving into those areas. And then, of course, the weeds, talking about vegetation up in Portage Bay. You've got Sucker Bay. You've got Steamboat Bay. The weeds that are emerging in Agency and Walker Bay. All of those areas are starting to turn on. Whereas last week, I couldn't say that. There were certain areas of the lake that the fish were turned on. In other areas, you'd see walleyes and they didn't want to bite. Walker Bay is going to start turning on. All of these areas are starting to really come online quickly, and that's because of this water temperature warming up. Walker Bay is still pretty clear, but it's starting to clear, or it's starting to get a little bit of green to it. When you get bug hatches, you get this tree pollen dumping in the water, sort of dirties up that water, and of course, you mix a little wind into the mix and this heat, things are starting to fire. And so this weekend will be radically different than last weekend. If you're up on Leech, you'll see noticeable differences on that body of water. So I love Leech as much as Mille Lacs. I also love fishing Winnebagosh. I love fishing Cass, Vermilion, all of our big bodies of water in Minnesota. We're so blessed to be able to fish them and have these resources. Red Lake, Lake of the Woods, all of these lakes, are starting to fish a lot differently now as we get in towards the summer. And I can't wait till I can hit all of them. I love walleye fishing. I love snapping plastics. I love fishing fish that are suspended, just different techniques every single day. that's what I love doing. And I love experimenting with new techniques, new baits, new colors. Speaking of, talking about different baits, new colors, like the VMC snitch jig with the blade on there, all of these things I love playing with, experimenting with, and using them in different settings to trigger walleyes. And I think it's great. And so, if you're heading up to Leech, to Winnie is a lot like Leech in the sense where these fish don't absolutely leave the shallows. I mean, you could get a really windy day on Leech. You could get a really windy day on Winnie, where these fish will slide right back up into those really shallow sand areas. And so if you get a blow for 1 or 2 days consistently into a shoreline, don't be afraid to slide down that shoreline, throw a jig and a shiner, a jig and a Crush City plastic, a jerk. You're going to pick up a lot of walleyes. It's just super fun fishing. If you love jig fishing in general, that area of the world is really hard to beat. So you'll see this week alone has really changed quite differently and getting into summer, but I would say change for the better. We're in this solid June pattern now where June is like my favorite time of year to fish. It's electric. You can absolutely catch these fish anywhere. As long as you're putting in some time scanning, even if you don't have forward facing sonar, side imaging on Leech and Winnie, you can go and just drive the lake until you bump into schools of fish. You can't say that for a lot of lakes where you can just side image and find the schools. I still do it all the time on Winnebagosh. I still do it all the time on Leech. If I want to cover water and I want to find out at what depth these fish are sitting in, whether it's 6 feet, whether it's 10, whether it's 15, I will side image until I find pods of fish, and then I key in on the depth, and then I start using my forward-facing sonar to hunt them down from there. If you do that and you put in the work in all these lakes, you're going to catch more walleyes. Hey, we'll take one more quick break. When I come back, I want to talk pan fishing. I want to talk about being able to fish plastics, jerkbaits, summer patterns for panfish as we get towards June. Again, when I get done fishing at the end of the day, I get done guiding. I want to hop in my son's little boat. I want to get on our pontoon. I love going pan fishing. I love throwing jerkbaits in the evening, little paddle tails, lots of different plastics that I've been experimenting with. We'll talk about that after this.
OnX Fish is the best tool I have ever used for finding new lakes to target. Quickly filter lakes by species, then select trophy potential, high abundance, keeper potential, or high stocking effort to find the fish you are after in the size and the numbers you are trying to catch. Download from the App Store today to get research tools for the serious anglers and beginners alike, giving you the data to target the right lakes and the confidence to get there. Use tools like recent imagery, fishing hotspot data, or the best-in-class weather features that call out current wind, weather, barometer, moon phase, majors and minors, along with precip and more. OnX Fish is a phenomenal tool both on and off the water for discovering new fishing opportunities, many of which you'd never known existed. Download OnX Fish Midwest today, the app that is changing the game on ice and open water.
All right, let's talk some summer panfish patterns. The theme of this entire podcast has been this, radical shift from winter to summer. I know it wasn't that radical, but it sure seems like it in my mind. Surface temps really in a lot of lakes were in the upper 40s, lower 50s. And then now we've jumped right up to the 60s, even the mid 60s at times during daytime hours. You're seeing surface temperatures rise up into that mid 60s range. Man, it happened quickly, and the panfish transitioned very quickly. I fished panfish all over the map. Had the opportunity to fish with some customers this week. I also did some pan fishing on my own, and it went from, like I said earlier in the podcast, float fishing where you're just like literally throwing bobbers, really small plastics, to being able to throw larger plastics, being able to throw jerk baits, being able to fish really quickly over the top of cabbage beds, and then these fish that are transitioning into these bedding areas. It's been a lot of fun this week. I love aggressively pan fishing. my absolute go-to rod reel combo would be that, sort of medium light. I know a lot of people love these like really whippy light panfish 7-foot rods, right? I don't mind those for float fishing early, if I want to get a bend in the rod, especially, right after ice out or something. But I really would prefer like a medium light 7-foot rod, 7.2, 7.4, even, something in that range. I've been fishing the 13 fishing, 7.4 medium light with really light. I like to use like a 6-pound or a 4-pound braid if I can get away with it. But even like just a 4-pound Suffix Advanced Mono, it literally has no stretch, so I can huck that really light bait out there as far as I can fish it, and then, or as far as I can cast it, and work it back to the boat. And then I get way better hookup percentages with a rod like that. Even with gills, bigger gills that I'm fishing, I like that medium light rod. Not the light whippy, extra fast extra slow, like moderate taper to the action. I would prefer something that's medium light in that fast action, or even extra fast sometimes when I'm jerkbait fishing for crappies. But I like that backbone factor. I can cast it a lot further. It's not that big whippy, sort of parabolic panfish rod of the past. I truly, truly love using like a medium light rod. You can get away with it too, like it just in your garage. If you got some older walleye rods that you're not using, even in that medium light category, that maybe are just a little too light for jig fishing walleyes or snap jigging, you could put those to good use and use them in this method where you're using a 16th ounce jig, either a straight tail plastic, something like that, or a jerk bait. I love little X-Wraps. Number 6 X-Wraps are probably my favorite way to catch crappies this time of year as they're moving, as the cabbage isn't quite up yet. A lot of it's emerging, or a lot of it didn't die off last year, but you can fish clean over the top of it. Some others that are my real go-tos as far as that crankbait category are the Rapala ultralights. They've got like a husky jerk, ultralight husky jerk, even a shad wrap. Number 4 shad wraps sometimes work, and you can work these things over the top of the weeds. But what I love about an X-Wrap more than all of those is that dress treble. And you can still buy like a VMC dress treble and put it on the back of a small husky jerk, but just having that ultralight X-Wrap where you can cast that thing, quite a distance and then work that bait back to the boat. Crappies absolutely love X-Wraps. So do bluegills. When you have that dress treble on there, bluegills are like really inefficient feeders, and they'll come up and sort of strike baits randomly, and they miss the hooks a lot of the times. I fish in the evenings for panfish a lot this time of year just because I'm busy guiding. But me and my son, me and my daughter, my family, we like going out, having dinner, grilling out, and then going out and having a little fishing competition or whatever. And most of the time it's just for fun, catch and release. But we like fishing panfish because it's fun. Those crappies come up out of the weeds. They're feeding. A lot of these fish that are starting to slide up into these bedding areas. This week alone, we went from pre-spawn to spawn. I was catching lots of females that were already post-spawn. And they were actively feeding and hitting the jerkbaits. So if you've never fished jerkbaits for panfish, highly recommend going number 6, even number 8's, like a number 8 X-Wrap you can catch a ton of crappies on. When it's cool water and earlier in the season, I tend to use number 6's. As the fish get more aggressive and they're feeding actively on some bigger profile baits, I will use a number 8. Number 8 X-Wrap isn't entirely much bigger. What's cool about a number 8 too is it's super intriguing for bass. Catching a lot of largemouth mixed in with the panfish is always fun, especially on a medium light, 7-foot, 7.4 rod. You're catching some post-spawn largemouth in with the mix with panfish, I'm all in. And so all I wanted to talk about on this podcast was the fact that, you can go from, fishing really, really slow like we did last week to fishing really, really aggressive and tie on a jerkbait. You're going to catch a ton of panfish. The bluegills too, they're starting to move in the shallows into these areas. They're not quite spawning yet in a lot of lakes, but I would say with this warm up over the next couple weeks, you're going to see bluegills on beds. Again, like talking about bed fishing for smallmouth, I just ask anglers, we got to use common sense and be, very conscious of the resource. Whenever you're getting around panfish on beds, if you're catching them, put them right back. They're going to go right back to their beds, not hurting those fish, not plucking fish off their beds like people used to do back in the day and filling their freezers. If we do that, we're going to have great pan fishing for years to come. But as we get into this time frame where these fish are moving up into those areas, you can have a lot of fun with a jerkbait in the evening by yourself, or in the morning for that matter, by yourself. You don't need a fancy boat. You can sit out in a 14-foot boat like my son and myself do all the time. It truly is a fun way to fish. And, a lot of people after opener hits, they completely forget about pan fishing. It just sort of falls to the wayside. It's just something that, it was a springtime and they're on to other things, and that's fine. But for me, I absolutely love pan fishing. And so I jump at any chance I can to sort of fish aggressive, fish with artificials, and just sort of get after it, explore new lakes. I use my Onyx app all the time, exploring new lakes for panfish. My son and I would say more than any other conversation when it comes to exploring new lakes has to do with new panfish possibilities or lakes that we haven't explored yet. So get on that Onyx app, check out, all of the surveys, all of the creel the data collection that's on the lakes, the stocking reports, the DNR assessments that they have. They have it for the entire Midwest. It's a great resource and tool to sort of geek out over your next location when it comes to panfish. Hey, we'll take one more pause. When we come back, I'm going to wrap up this podcast. As we get towards June here, things are heating up quickly, and so is the bite. Stay tuned. We got more Dialed In Angling after this. All right, we'll put a wrap on this week's edition of Dialed In Angling. Hopefully you're getting out, enjoying this summer-like weather, grilling with your family, getting out fishing in the evening. If you have an opportunity to get out on a local lake, even river system, now's the time to do it. June is such a special month. I've got a lot of fishing opportunities I want to talk about. I know next week's podcast, I want to dive into some cool fishing that me and my son are about to embark on this weekend. I'm taking a couple days off, and we're going on an adventure. I want to talk about it in next week's podcast. You're going to want to tune into that. But get out, get after it. If you're heading to Mille Lacs Lake, if you're heading to Leech, Winnie, use some of these these applications that I've talked about, whether you're bobber fishing, start experimenting with some new presentations. You're going to have a lot of fun doing it. If you want to get good at a certain presentation or get better at certain techniques, June is the time frame to do it. You just got to carve out time to do it. So have a safe and happy weekend. Hopefully everybody gets out and gets after it on your local fishery, or if you've been geeking out about a trip you're going on, or if you're just going up north for the first time. Good luck to everybody. We're going to take a break from the fishing reports this week. I know a lot of our guides are super busy in June. We're going to take a break. When we come back next week, they're going to have some more reports for you, but I just wanted to give the guys a week off this week. I know a lot of them are working hard because the bite is red hot right now. So good luck to everybody. As always, I'm Tony Roach. This has been the Dialed In Angling Podcast.